The study of laughter. Luma Velinari pressed her triple-jointed fingers against the holographic display, rewinding the human comedy archive for the 7th time that cycle. The pale blue luminescence of her skin flickered with concentration patterns that would have conveyed deep analytical thought to any Zarelian observer. Unfortunately, she was alone in her cramped quarters aboard the Solstice Dawn, surrounded by the metallic hum of the ship's life support systems and the faint chemical residue of a dozen different alien atmospheres. "So the human enters the establishment," she murmured, her voice carrying the melodic undertones that made Zarelian speech sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "And the bartender inquires about his species. The human responds with information about his mother's profession." She paused, her large violet eyes narrowing in confusion. "This generates ... mirth?" The hologram flickered, showing a human comedian gesturing wildly at an audience that erupted in laughter. Luma had studied their facial expressions for weeks. Now, cataloging the muscle movements, the vocal patterns, the mysterious biochemical responses that humans called getting the joke. Her academic mind trained in xenolinguistics and diplomatic protocol approached humor like a complex equation. Waiting to be solved. Around her, the ship's corridors buzzed with the constant activity of the Joint Training Program. Humans and aliens worked together in careful coordination, following protocols established by the Galactic Peacekeeping Council. But Luma had observed something the protocols didn't address. The humans who succeeded in earning trust and friendship were the ones who could make their alien colleagues laugh. Lieutenant Commander Zara Okafor had managed to get the stern, reptilian delegates to crack their scaled faces in amusement with stories about her grandmother's cooking. Petty Officer James Kowalski had somehow convinced the gaseous, ethereal beings to participate in what they called atmospheric comedy jokes that literally changed the air composition around them. Even the notoriously serious crystalline entities had developed something resembling mirth when exposed to human wordplay. Luma's attempts at humor had been met with polite confusion at best. Her Zarelian culture communicated through layered metaphor, scent-based emotional markers, and rhythmic patterns that could take hours to fully unfold. Human humor seemed to rely on brevity, surprise, and cultural references that her species simply didn't share. Still, she was determined. Tomorrow night's cultural exchange evening would feature an open microphone session, and Luma had signed up to perform. She had studied 17 different human comedy styles, analyzed the mathematical principles behind timing and misdirection, and even attempted to incorporate human pheromone patterns into her routine. Closing the holographic display, Luma began practicing her carefully constructed jokes, her skin cycling through hopeful blue patterns. She had no idea that her unique perspective would soon revolutionize interspecies comedy, or that one human's laughter would change everything. The performance, the ship's main recreation bay, had been transformed into an amphitheater for cultural exchange evening. Bioluminescent decorations from the aquatic collective swayed alongside crystalline wind chimes from the silicon communes, while the air itself shimmered with the ethereal beings' contribution molecules that created kaleidoscopic patterns when disturbed by sound waves. Representatives from over 20 species filled the curved seating arrangements, each section specially designed to accommodate different physiological needs. Luma stood in the preparation area, her skin cycling through nervous amber patterns despite her best efforts to maintain composure. She wore her formal diplomatic robes, deep purple fabric that complemented her natural coloration while featuring the intricate geometric patterns that represented her family's achievement in interspecies communication. Her prepared jokes were memorized perfectly, each one carefully constructed to bridge the gap between Zarelian metaphorical thinking and human comedic structure. The previous performers had been successful in their own ways. A tentacled musician from the oceanic depths had played a piece that literally made the water-based beings in the audience bubble with joy. A human poet had recited verses that caused the crystalline entities to resonate in harmonic appreciation. Even the usually stoic reptilian delegates had shown approval for a dance performance that incorporated their traditional victory movements. "Next up," announced the evening's host, a cheerful human named Captain Rebecca Torres. "We have Cadet Luma Velinari, representing the Zerelian Academic Exchange Program, performing human-style comedy." Luma stepped onto the stage, her enhanced vocal cords adjusting to project across the vast space. The audience fell silent, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy focusing their attention on her. She could smell the cocktail of different atmospheric preferences, feel the electromagnetic fields generated by the silicon-based life forms, and sense the subtle gravitational fluctuations that indicated the presence of the high-density beings. "Greetings, fellow beings," she began, her voice carrying the traditional Zerelian harmony patterns. "I have studied your human comedy, and I believe I understand the fundamental principles." She paused, exactly as the human comedians had done. In her research, a three-headed diplomat walks into a black hole with no exit protocol. The silence was immediate and profound. She had expected this. The setup required patience. The first head says, "This was not in the navigation briefing." The second head says, "Perhaps we should file a complaint with the Galactic Tourism Board." But the third head, she paused again, allowing the tension to build. The third head says, "At least now we know why they call it a singularity. It's the only place in the universe where all three of us can finally agree on something. We're completely screwed." The silence stretched on. Luma could see confused expressions, uncomfortable shifting, and what appeared to be genuine concern from some of the human officers. Her carefully constructed joke, which had seemed so logical during her preparations, was clearly falling flat. The mathematical precision of her timing, the layered metaphorical structure, the careful consideration of different species' death taboos, none of it was working. She was about to apologize and leave the stage when she heard it. The breakthrough, a single human voice erupted from the audience with such explosive laughter that it startled several of the more sensitive species. The sound was raw, uncontrolled, and completely genuine, the kind of laughter that comes from deep in the chest and refuses to be contained. It belonged to Ensign Theo Marsh, a junior communications officer who had been sitting in the back row, previously unnoticed by most of the gathering. Theo was doubled over, tears streaming down his face, gasping for air between waves of laughter. His reaction was so intense that it initially concerned the medical staff, but it was clearly not distress. It was pure, undiluted joy. The kind of laughter that was infectious, even across species barriers. "Oh my God," he managed to gasp out, still shaking with mirth. That's actually brilliant." He wiped his eyes and looked around at the confused faces surrounding him. "Don't you see? She's not just making a joke about bureaucracy or death or diplomatic incompetence. She's making a joke about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself." The audience remained largely silent, but their attention had shifted from confused discomfort to curious interest. Theo stood up, his enthusiasm evident in every gesture. The three-headed diplomat represents the different aspects of decision-making, right? The practical, the procedural, and the philosophical. Most of the time, these aspects are in conflict. That's why diplomacy is so complicated. But in the face of absolute certainty, like falling into a black hole, they finally find unity. It's existential comedy. Luma's skin began to shift from amber anxiety to surprised silver. This human had not only understood her joke, but had grasped the deeper, philosophical implications that she hadn't even been sure she'd successfully embedded in the structure. "And the timing," Theo continued, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed to his subject. "The way she built up the expectation with the first two heads following predictable bureaucratic responses, then subverted it with the third head's moment. of clarity. It's like watching someone discover enlightenment through catastrophe. A few chuckles began to ripple through the audience. The crystalline entities started to resonate in what their species used to indicate appreciation for complex harmony. The ethereal beings began to shift their molecular patterns in ways that suggested approval. But here's the really clever part, Theo said, now fully animated. The joke works on multiple levels for different species. For humans, it's about bureaucratic absurdity. For the Xerelians, it's about the unity of consciousness. For the crystalline folks, it's about harmonic resolution. For the ethereals, it's about the transformation of matter under extreme conditions. She's created a universal joke, one that each species can understand in their own way. Now the laughter was spreading. Not the polite appreciation that had greeted earlier performances, but genuine, delighted laughter. The kind that comes from recognizing something profound disguised as something simple. Luma stood on the stage, her skin now cycling through patterns of amazement and gratitude. One human's willingness to think deeply about her attempt at humor had transformed what seemed like a complete failure into an unexpected success. The connection, the recreation bay, buzzed with animated conversation as the formal program concluded. Luma found herself surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, each wanting to discuss the intricacies of interspecies humor. The tentacled musicians expressed interest in incorporating her rhythmic timing into their performances. The reptilian delegates, known for their literal interpretation of language, were fascinated by the concept of layered meaning in comedy. But it was Theo who approached her with the most intriguing proposition. "I've been thinking about what you did up there," he said, his eyes still bright with enthusiasm. "You didn't just tell a joke. You created a new form of communication. A way for different species to share not just information, but perspective." Luma's skin flickered with interested purple patterns. "Your interpretation was ... unexpected. In Xerelian culture, we spend considerable time analyzing the philosophical implications of humor. But I had not considered that other species might discover their own meanings within the same structure." "That's exactly it," Theo replied, pulling out a small recording device. "I've been documenting communication patterns between different species for my thesis on xenolinguistics. What you've stumbled onto could revolutionize how we approach interspecies dialogue." They found a quiet corner of the bay, away from the continuing festivities. Theo shared his research months of documented failures in cross-cultural communication, instances where perfectly logical information had been completely misunderstood, moments where emotional context had been lost in translation. "The problem," he explained, "is that we've been approaching interspecies communication like a technical challenge. We focus on accuracy, precision, protocol. But humor requires vulnerability, creativity, and the willingness to be misunderstood." Luma considered this, her skin shifting to contemplative blue-green. "In Xerelian philosophy, we have a concept called Velinary Shakti, the gift of uncertain meaning. The idea that the most profound truths can only be communicated through ambiguity, allowing the recipient to discover their own understanding." "Yes," Theo exclaimed. "That's what happened tonight. Your joke wasn't just funny. It was a puzzle that each species could solve in their own way." The crystalline entities found harmonic resolution. The ethereals saw molecular transformation. The humans recognized existential absurdity. Everyone found their own truth. They talked for hours, sharing insights about their respective cultures, comparing notes on the subtle differences in how various species processed humor and meaning. Luma learned about human concepts like irony, sarcasm, and self-deprecation. Theo discovered Xerelian forms of comedy that existed purely in scent-based communication, or in the mathematical relationships between spoken rhythms. "I have a proposal," Theo said as the evening wound down. "What if we collaborated on developing a new form of interspecies entertainment? Not just comedy, but a whole new way of sharing stories ideas and perspectives across cultural boundaries. Luma's skin brightened with excited silver patterns. You would be willing to work with someone whose first public performance was objectively terrible? Are you kidding? Theo laughed. It was terrible in the best possible way. It was so uniquely, authentically you that it created something entirely new. That's not failure, that's innovation. The new language 6 months later, the Solstice Dawn hosted its first official Perspective Comedy Night, an event that had evolved far beyond Luma's original awkward performance. The recreation bay was packed with beings from across the galaxy, including several high-ranking diplomatic officials who had traveled specifically to witness what was being called the most significant development in interspecies cultural exchange since the invention of the universal translator. Luma and Theo had spent those months developing what they called multidimensional humor, a form of entertainment that was simultaneously accessible to multiple species while maintaining unique meaning for each audience. Their collaborative process had become a model for other interspecies partnerships throughout the fleet. On stage, Luma wore robes that incorporated elements from dozens of different cultures, crystalline resonance patterns, ethereal molecular structures, human, geometric designs, and her own Zarelian ceremonial colors. Her skin glowed with confidence as she began her performance. A quantum physicist, a Zarelian philosopher, and a crystalline harmonic analyst walk into a probability field, she began, her voice carrying the complex tonal patterns that had taken months to perfect. The physicist says, according to my calculations, we have a 33.7% chance of existing right now. The philosopher says, but do we exist, or do we merely think we exist? And the harmonic analyst says, she paused, allowing the tension to build across multiple species' attention spans. The harmonic analyst says, the real question is, why are we all talking to ourselves? The laughter that erupted was unlike anything the galaxy had heard before. It was layered, multifaceted, and completely inclusive. Each species found their own meaning, their own reason to laugh, their own moment of recognition and joy. In the audience, Captain Torres made notes for her report to the Galactic Peacekeeping Council. The success of the Solstice Dawn training program was being attributed largely to the breakthrough in interspecies communication that had started with one cadet's failed joke and one human's willingness to think differently. As the evening concluded, Luma and Theo stood together on the stage, looking out at an audience that represented the full diversity of galactic civilization. Beings who had never before found common ground were sharing laughter, sharing understanding, sharing the simple joy of being alive in the universe together. You know what the best part is? Theo said quietly, so only Luma could hear. What's that? She replied, her skin glowing with contentment. We're just getting started. There are thousands of species out there, each with their own way of seeing the universe. Imagine the comedy we haven't even discovered yet. Luma looked out at the laughing, diverse crowd and felt something that had no direct translation in any language, a sense of belonging that transcended species, culture, and biology. She had set out to learn human humor and had instead helped create something entirely new, a universal language of laughter that celebrated difference instead of erasing it. In the end, her failure had become the foundation for the greatest success in interspecies relations in galactic history. And it had all started with one human who was willing to laugh at something he didn't quite understand, and then take the time to figure out why it was actually brilliant.